Hello and welcome to your revision video for Macbeth. So today we will be revising the plot, characters, themes and context in Macbeth. But first of all, a short DNA, test your memory with these 5 questions, pause here and play when you're ready to get the answers. So here are the answers. Have a look at them, tick off the ones that you got right and make sure that you correct the ones that you didn't get right so you know what they are for next time. So let's start off with the plot. So every text that we study can be broken down into 8 key moments in the text. So what do you think are the 8 most important events in Macbeth? So think about them as the beginning, the middle and the end. What do you think happens that is really important that we must know about? So pause here, write down the points that you think are correct, and then I will share with you the list that we are going to learn. So here are the 8 key events that we are going to learn. So I've colour coded them. The red ones are at the beginning, the purple ones are at the middle, and the blue ones are the end. So first of all, it's the battle. So here Macbeth is established as a hero. He's a great warrior, but he's also quite a bloodthirsty person. The next important thing that happens is the witches' prophecies. So we have to know these because they influence everything that Macbeth does. After that, it's Lady Macbeth persuading Macbeth to kill Duncan and the dagger scene. So it's all about the decisions that led up to Duncan's murder. So that's really important when we learn about their relationship and the choice to commit regicide. As we move towards the middle, point number 4 is Duncan's murder. So while we actually don't see it, it's what happens afterwards. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's responses to actually killing the king are very different and important to know. Then in the middle of the text, we have Banquo's ghost, a really vital scene when we are looking at guilt. Number 6 is the Macduff murders. So these are the final murders that Macbeth authorises, and it's interesting to look at Macduff's response and compare it to Macbeth's response when he hears Lady Macbeth is dead later. And at the end, we have Lady Macbeth sleepwalking, showing that she's gone mad, she's struggling with her conscience, she's overcome with guilt, and then that leads to her eventual death. And then finally, we have to finish with Macbeth's death. So I've got some key quotations. Now, these are the basics, okay? So you need to make sure that you know these as a bare minimum. To get past that grade 4, though, you need to learn some more. So we're going to start off with the beginning, the battle. So the quotation we've got here is Duncan, "Oh, valiant cousin, worthy gentleman." The second point is about the witches' prophecies. So I've gone for Macbeth saying, "Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more," just after he's found out that they are prophesying for him to become king. The third point is when Lady Macbeth persuades Macbeth to kill Duncan. So this iconic quote, Lady Macbeth says, "Look like the innocent flower and be the serpent under it." All the ideas about duplicity are really clear in this quotation. Then as we go towards the middle, then we're going to be looking at Duncan's murder. So Macbeth afterwards feels very, very guilty and he questions, "Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand?" At the middle, we've got Banquo's ghost. So Macbeth sees the ghost and he says to it, "Thou canst not say I did it. Never shake thy gory locks at me." He's trying really, really hard not to be accused of this murder, even though it was him who authorised it and hired the murderers to kill him and flails. Here we've got the Macduff murders. So Macduff's response is very interesting. He says, "Oh, hell kite, all, what, all my pretty chickens and their dam at one fell swoop." So he is absolutely horrified that Macbeth has stooped so low as to murder his wife and children, the innocents in this, particularly in the Jacobean era. Now, as we head towards the end, we've got Lady Macbeth sleepwalking and her eventual death. So here I've chosen a quote that echoes the quotation about Neptune that Macbeth said at the start of the play. So she says, "All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Oh, oh, oh." So you can see that she's very distressed, she's very upset, and she can't understand why she can't get the stain off her conscience. But we know it's because she has incited Macbeth to commit regicide. And our final key quote is about Macbeth's death, and it's this iconic line at the end. He's just been killed, and Malcolm refers to him as this dead butcher and his fiend-like queen. It's a really great quote to get in, whether it's in a conclusion or whether it's in the main body of your essay, but it really shows you the full character arc, so a really important quote to know. So I've got some golden nuggets for you here. So these are just some little extra ideas that can be helpful just to drop in some of your interpretations. You don't especially need quotes that go with them. They're just concepts that you would use to add in your explanation in the paragraph. So here they are. So the first one is that the only prophecy that remains unfulfilled by the end of the play is Fleance's. So if you remember, Banquo will be father to kings. Now, what's interesting to note is that Banquo is actually James I's ancestor. So maybe the cycle of kingship will continue as James I is actually on the throne. My second idea is that the narrative is cyclical. It begins and ends with the execution of traitors. The Thane of Cawdor perhaps is a tainted role, and maybe Shakespeare could be cautioning kings or rulers generally against putting their trust in the wrong people, because actually that was what led to Duncan's downfall. He wrongly trusted the first Thane of Cawdor, and then he wrongly trusted Macbeth. They all literally and metaphorically stabbed him in the back. And this is the final point. So this play brings up some ideas about fate and free will. So perhaps the audience should question the difference between them. So fate is what will definitely happen, the idea of destiny. So the witches tell the future, but Macbeth uses his free will to actually commit that sin. No one tells him to, apart from Lady Macbeth. He's the one that does it, and by doing it, that is his choice. So actually, perhaps we could question, would it have happened anyway? Would he have become king? But it would have been through the natural progression. We just don't know. So I'm going to run through some key context with you. And these are the things, remember, that are really easy just to drop in that why section of the paragraph or after a quote. So the great chain of being, really important to know about. God's at the top, followed by the monarch. So do you remember that pyramid? It has to be God and then the monarch. In terms of men and women, men are higher up on the chain than women are, as they were considered to be superior. But also, breaking the chain comes with dire consequences. It's the idea that everyone has their place and you've got to stay in it. You can't move up and down. It's not the way it works. And if you try to, there'll be personal punishment, but also things like nature, the natural order will be completely disturbed. Here we've also got the divine right of kings, which links really closely to the great chain of being. So the monarch is God's representative on earth, and committing regicide, was a sin against both king and the god. It's the highest possible sin that could be committed. That's really important to remember. It's partly why Macbeth's punishment is so horrific. One of the first things he feels when he kills Duncan is that he can't say amen anymore. He is being punished by God straight from the start. So just a reminder about women. Women were generally subservient to men because it was a patriarchal society. We have to know that word patriarchal, meaning run by men. And actually powerful women were considered as really frightening, quite scandalous, quite shocking for Jacobeans. So you can imagine how they felt when Lady Macbeth is transgressing the role of women, subverting all the expectations that are placed on her gender. They would be quite frightened and horrified by her. And that links us to the witches. So James I was on the throne at the time. He was very, very superstitious, and he wrote Demonology, the book, and it was all about how to recognise witches. And there was this belief that women had made a pact with the devil to become witches so they could have these supernatural powers. And James I even believed that the witches had nearly caused his death by creating a storm as he travelled on a ship home with his new bride. So perhaps that's why there is so much pathetic fallacy. Do you remember the thunder, the storm, when the witches are always there? Because actually they are associated with creating this terrible weather. They are forces of evil. So we've also got the Gunpowder Plot, which took place the year before the publication of Macbeth. So at the time, the country was Protestant because James I was, and he was intolerant of Catholics, and they became persecuted under his reign. So a Catholic group decided to take some action, and they tried to blow up Parliament while the king was in it. However, due to a tip-off, they were unsuccessful, and when they went down to the cellar to see if it was true, Guy Fawkes was found there with all the barrels of gunpowder, and he was tortured and he was executed. So he is the figure that is traditionally burnt on a bonfire, just to remind us that it's, completely against all possible rules. It's a sin to commit regicide. And then finally, we're just going to look at Shakespeare and James I's relationship, as that is quite interesting. So James I was Shakespeare's patron, meaning that he funded a lot of Shakespeare's plays. So as a result, Shakespeare needs to present not only James I in a good light, but also keep presenting the monarch's views through the plays so that the money kept on coming in. And you can see that really clearly with the presentation of women, the presentation of the witches and the supernatural, and also warning the audience against committing regicide and breaking the chain of being, because remember, that was James I. One of his biggest fears was assassination. He'd had this attempt on his life only the year before in the Gunpowder Plot, and he was worried it certainly wouldn't be the last. And then finally, Shakespeare was quite progressive in terms of how he presents women. So he presents the witches and Lady Macbeth as very strong women. They actually drive the events of the whole plot, even though the men are the people who carry out the actions. However, James I believed that women were innately more sinful than men, and so while Shakespeare does present them as strong, he associates them with the supernatural and the devil, partly to prevent their power from being frightening. These women were not usual, they were not the regular women, they were much more powerful than that due to their association with the supernatural. So this concludes your revision video. Complete the attached sheet with your notes and use this whenever you want to come back to the really important basic parts of Macbeth. Well done.